Chapter 22. Tuesday. For the next 2 days things were quiet. Absolutely nothing happened as far as finding dead bodies or even parts of dead bodies. All Doreen did was research, garden in her yard or Millicent's, plus visited with Nan. They had that breakfast together as promised. This afternoon Doreen thought maybe the world would leave her alone now. She wasn't overwhelmed with reporters anymore. If she could avoid being seen at Millicent's house, then the media wouldn't make the connection between her and the newest body parts. At least she hoped. But then Mac's orders to do a press blackout about the bones found at his mom's house must have included the arm and hand found in the creek, as Doreen had seen no mention in the press about any of those finds. And that was really helpful too, as far as Doreen's infamous reputation was concerned. Not that she believed this gossipy town wasn't going to get a hold of this juicy news, regardless of the blackout. Just the presence of the police would get the grapevine buzzing. Which reminded her. She pulled out her phone and sent Mac a text. Still looking for the name of the woman who attacked me. Did you talk to her? The response was instant. He called Doreen to say, not yet. Forget about her. No. The next time I see her, I am going to talk to her. So it's in your best interests to give me the name now. This time, when the answer came, it was in a much lower voice. Hannah Thoreau. Don't do anything criminal. And he hung up. Doreen walked to her laptop, put down the ever-present cup of coffee that had become her at-home addiction that she could barely afford, and typed in the name. Hannah Thoreau was part of one of the founding families of the area. They'd been here since. She tried to do the math and gave up. She went with forever and grinned at that. In that case, they should know damn near everything I need to find out. Muggs growled beside her. She looked down at him. His hackles rose as he stared at the back door. What's the matter, Muggs? What do you see? Muggs jumped to his feet and barked. She never quite understood that philosophy. If she didn't say anything, he would normally sit here, content to growl a little in the back of his throat. But the minute she told him it was nothing, he became an aggravated guard dog. With everything else that had been going on in this crazy world of hers, she wouldn't ignore Muggs's warning. She stood and glanced out the window, then opened the back door and stepped out. Muggs raced into the backyard. Muggs! Muggs, get back here, she shouted. Muggs ignored her. He was intent on whatever it was he saw. Unfortunately, she couldn't see anything. As she stepped down the few steps of the deck and walked across the yard, Muggs disappeared around the corner in the direction where they'd found the body part. And that immediately made her suspicious. She sneaked up to the side of the fence and peered around the corner. Sure enough, there was a reporter, the same woman who had been in her front yard. Doreen gasped. The woman turned, caught sight of Doreen and cried out, "There you are." Doreen shook her head. "What are you doing back here?" The woman gave her a fat smile. "Not trespassing. This is city property." She motioned at Muggs. "I see your dog is as well trained as you are." Doreen's back stiffened. "Excuse me? In what ways am I not well trained? And what kind of comment is that coming from you?" She pulled her cell phone from her pocket and hit video. The woman snorted. "You won't give us the time of day for an interview. So that means you can insult me?" The cameraman nudged the reporter, but Sybil wasn't listening to him. She finally had a chance to talk to Doreen, and she wouldn't let this opportunity pass. "Ever since you arrived, you've been nothing but a headache in this town." "The headaches were here long before I got here, and you are welcome, by the way. Because other than this, you'd be left covering the annual bake sale for beagles." The woman stiffened. From the look of laughter in her cameraman's face, Doreen realized it probably was the truth. The reporter sniffed. "If you wouldn't terrorize the innocent residents of this town, it would be a lot easier to talk to you. But as it is, you're one pain in the ass." The woman lifted her nose and glared. Doreen studied Sybil for a long moment. "You never gave me your last name. And I won't give it to you now." She hadn't caught sight of the woman for very long, but there was a definite. "You're a Thoreau, aren't you?" The woman's face paled. The cameraman looked surprised. "I see the resemblance. So was that your mother or your sister or an aunt who assaulted me?" The woman shouted, "Nobody assaulted you. And certainly none of my family." Doreen leaned a little closer. "Are you sure about that?" The woman paled even further. She turned to look at her cameraman. "Let's go, Robert. Nothing to be seen here. And stay away from here. Do a story about Hannah Thoreau, who I'll be talking to my lawyers about, going to jail." The woman trembled. "Hannah? You were talking to Hannah?" "No, I was not talking to Hannah. She attacked me. Came to my house and smacked me across the face. I am sure you loved that. Maybe you even put her up to it." The woman shook her head, her hands gripping and ungripping the microphone in her hand. What the hell did she need a microphone for? But Doreen was much too wary of reporters. "And if you're recording this, I'll definitely have my lawyers come after you too." Robert held up his hand. "Camera isn't on." "Doesn't mean audio isn't," Doreen said, pointing at the microphone. "We're allowed to do audio. We keep the town up to date with all the news. You never know what tidbits will end up being important. Doesn't mean I give you my permission to use anything I say or do either," Doreen said. "Do you give your permission?" "Of course. I am always on TV and in the news." She tossed her hair back, making Doreen laugh. "And if you had anything to do with Hannah's attack, believe me, I'll make sure your name is included in my statement to the media and my lawyer." The reporter shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." She tried to step back, but Robert was in the way. She turned and shoved him. "Robert, I said we are leaving." "Strategic retreat," Doreen taunted. "That's all right. I know who you are now." The woman shot her a look, but it held fear more than anything else. Doreen had to wonder just what the hell was going on here. As soon as they were out of sight, she called Muggs back and headed inside again. She sat down to continue her research when her phone rang. "I don't want you going after Hannah Thoreau," Max said without a preamble. "What about the stupid reporter? Can I go after her?" "Was she at your place again?" he asked in curiosity. "I already warned the press to stay away." "She was at the creek just a minute ago, where we found the hand." "Interesting," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I wonder who told her something was there." "You can bet it wasn't me. But there was something about her. I accused her of being a Thoreau." She turned very white. "Now that you mention it," Max said slowly, "I think she is part of the Thoreau family. She married and changed her name, but I think she might be Hannah's niece." "I don't know how old Hannah was. I was thinking early 40s, maybe mid-40s. I think she's 46 or 47-ish now." "That would make sense. The reporter isn't older than 25, I don't think. She got pretty upset when I suggested she do something about Hannah attacking me." She heard Mac's long drawn-out sigh on the other end. "Did you have to go there?" "She insulted me. She was nothing but rude. I have taken just about enough abuse from that family," she said curtly. "If you want to hear the audio of the conversation we had, you can come over and listen to it. I got it on record." And she hung up. Inside she smiled. Then Goliath hopped up on the table and lay on her keyboard. "No. Get off the keyboard. What is it about cats and keyboards? She'd never had a problem before, but all of a sudden, Goliath realized the keyboard held greater interest than him in her eyes. She picked him up and cuddled him. Honest, I love you. But I need access to my keyboard. His huge guttural engine kicked in, and he rubbed against her. She looked down at the laptop to see he'd switched the pages. She didn't even know how he managed to do that. She leaned forward to read the page he'd brought her to. And wouldn't you know it? Something to do with the Thoreau family. Doreen shifted Goliath in her arms so she could study the page. Apparently, the family had been here for several hundred years. Their original homesteaders had water rights to Mission Creek, blah 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 blah. Hannah Thoreau was one of 2 daughters. She'd gone through a rough period when her best friend had disappeared. Doreen continued to read, finding tiny bits of information threaded through the interviews, but nothing really concrete was there. Until she got to the last line. Hannah Thoreau was the last person to see Betty Miles alive. Doreen sat back. Well, now I really want to talk to her. She searched where Hannah currently lived and frowned. She didn't appear to have an address Doreen could find in the Mission. She searched for other family members and came up with 2 more, including a sister. She looked up the sister's house number and street name, plus got a phone number. As soon as she dialed, a woman answered. Yes, I was looking for Hannah, please. Why? Came the curt tone on the other end. Doreen's eyebrows rose. I wanted to speak to her. Well, it's not going to happen, so give it up. And she hung up on Doreen. Very interesting. She really should have gotten out of the vehicle and talked to Hannah at the grocery store. Although the woman most likely would have driven away. Doreen should have followed her while she had the chance. If Hannah was the last one to see Betty Miles, then it made sense that Hannah didn't want it all dredged back up again. She probably went through hell back then. Doreen frowned again. There had to be more to this. She kept digging. While the internet was mighty huge, it was slim on viable information. Then she went back to the PDFs she'd sent from the library. She printed off all the articles, wasting several dollars worth of paper and ink, but at the moment it seemed that important. With a stack of paper in hand, she grabbed her coffee cup and headed into the living room to study the information. She brought a highlighter and her notepad and pen with her. She found several mentions of Hannah. But as Doreen came to recognize, the mention of Hannah added sensationalism to the article. Anything that brought involvement of the prominent founding family would be news. The girls had gone out in the evening and had come back in high spirits and drunk. Doreen nodded. In other words, normal teenage girls. As Doreen continued to read, according to Hannah, this behavior on Betty's part never stopped. She got wilder and wilder. Although Hannah got drunk just as often as Betty did. But toward the end, they weren't getting drunk together. So, at what point were you no longer best friends? Doreen asked quietly to the empty room. And why? She jotted down more notes, realizing she needed the case files from Mac. Or at least to have him double-check some of this information. Seemed like there was a 3-month period where Hannah and Betty weren't hanging out as much. If anybody knew what Betty was up to, it would be Hannah. But it was unlikely Hannah would discuss her friend's disappearance. Particularly not with Doreen.